Okay, so here's something that people tend to wonder about. Uh, what is the nature of reality? What can we know about reality? What is the best representation of reality that we can achieve? People make conflicting claims about this. This is a problem, the essential problem here. And they can't all be right. So we want to figure out who's right, and we want to have the fewest assumptions possible. So we're going to start with the unknown and build from there. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm going to assume pragmatism in this video. Pragmatism essentially establishes that we can know some things about reality, not perfectly, not absolutely, but we can know some things. And it's a foundation for building further knowledge and further understanding. It allows us to take the first step to try out some idea and see how far it can take us. So let's try the first idea. So what is the most obvious thing that exists? Well, things. And let's call things matter. Okay? So this is basically materialism. Simple materialism. So, but what about things that are not matter? Okay? But they have some effect on the world. Things like air, light, thought, emotion, heat, space between matter, the mind itself. What if matter is just something in the mind? So this leads to other philosophies like idealism and dualism and supernaturalism. So what if there's nature and then the supernatural? Does God exist? So these are questions we like to figure out, but we want to keep our assumptions minimized. So in order to achieve that, let's just see how far we can take this idea of matter and see what we can learn about it. And so what's the most powerful explanation we have for matter? And that's science so far at this point. So specifically physics. Science is basically the repeated application of pragmatism and using Occam's razor to minimize assumptions. It's very useful. It's well supported by pragmatism. So it's a good starting place. But the problem is that science is a method. Specifically, it's not a philosophy per se. So what if we took the basic assumptions of science and see where it takes us? So we're going to make a philosophy out of science and see how well it works. And if we need to improve it later, we will. Turns out there's more than just matter in science. There are things like energy, space-time, forces like gravity, the electromagnetic force. The principle of science called Occam's razor helps us to keep these assumptions minimized. So any assumption that doesn't pull its weight, essentially, we reject. So what ends up happening here is materialism has expanded into scientific materialism. Now the problem is when you try this in the real world and you have a discussion with somebody, maybe a debate, well, what do you get? Suddenly you have people saying things like, well, you're a materialist, and obviously there are things that are not made of matter, so you must be an idiot. And this actually happens. And the way to get around it, you have to basically waste time explaining that, no, I'm not just talking about matter, I'm talking about all these other things. And you have to battle this conventional stereotype of materialism. And the other problem is that the word materialism in conventional usage has certain connotations. A materialist is someone who's obsessed with material success and greed and moral corruption, and especially theists will use this to kind of gain points with the audience by painting a naturalist as just a materialist, as a naive materialist. So let's kill two birds with one stone here. The two birds are, we want to represent this improved understanding of materialism, this scientific materialism. And we also want to completely bypass this whole circus of arguing about what is materialism. So what we're going to do is rename scientific materialism into physicalism. And we choose the word physicalism because physics is the foundation of science. it has the fewest assumptions, essentially. So we go back to the debate, and now we say, no, I'm not a materialist, I'm a physicalist. And that's an unusual word for them, and they're not used to it. So they say, what's a physicalist? And you say, well, a physicalist is one who believes that the things that exist are things that have been discovered to exist by science, especially physics. So what you're doing here is pretty nifty. You're allying yourself with science, and this makes it really hard for them to argue against you, because science has demonstrable, objective evidence to support its claims. The theories work. You can make testable predictions that reliably come true. And essentially, you can really use this to crush most opponents, because they've got nothing. If you're not allied with science, you can't back up your claims with evidence, reliable evidence, because if you could, then it would be science, which supports physicalism. So essentially, you can crush any claim by just saying, well, show me the evidence. And they don't have any. They don't have any evidence. And if they do, well, okay. That's actually a good thing, because you can test it, and if it's true, then you've found the truth, and that's what we're after anyway. And the secret weapon of physicalism is that it supports the concept of information. Information exists. This is a tricky word, because there are some materialists who will argue for a stricter version of materialism, which rejects information as something that's derived. But in physics, information is accepted as something that exists. It's a valid entity. There's a scientific study of information. You can think of information as things like structure, form, shape, arrangement, relationship, process, system, organization, things like that. Often these are used implicitly in science, and they don't necessarily have a formal definition, but they are a valid concept. And as the study of information improves, it will become more concretely explained in science. But the point is that information is something that exists physically. Just as forces exist, just as space-time exists, just as energy exists, it's not matter, but it exists. Okay? And this throws a wrench in the arguments of dualists and supernaturalists, because they'll say something like, the mind is not material, so it's supernatural. But the mind, you can reply, you say, well, the mind is a process, which is a kind of information, and therefore it's part of the physical world. So you can kind of cut the legs out from under a lot of the arguments of dualists and supernaturalists. So that's why I choose physicalism, and the great thing about it is if something comes along that they have evidence for, it becomes part of physicalism. It's an evolving philosophy. Thanks.